Hello and welcome. History remembers betrayal better than it remembers love. You know this, don't you? The tales that survive the centuries, the ones whispered in taverns and chronicled in dusty tomes, always favor the knife in the back over the hand extended in friendship. And nowhere is this truer than in the legend of Cass the Bloody-Handed, the so-called traitor who struck down his master at the pinnacle of power, who shattered an empire with a single swing of his cursed blade. But what if everything you've been told about that moment, that terrible, universe-altering moment, was a lie? Not a simple lie, but a necessary one. What if the greatest villain in the multiverse was actually its savior, and the only reward for his sacrifice was eternal damnation? Let's walk together through the official history first, the version carved into monuments and repeated by scholars who never questioned what they were taught. Let's examine the tale of Vecna and Cass as the world knows it, so that later, when we peel back the layers of deception, you'll understand just how deep the truth was buried. Vecna. Even now, the name carries weight, doesn't it? The whispered one. The master of secrets. The undying king. Before he was a god, before he was even a lich, he was a mortal wizard whose hunger for knowledge exceeded the bounds of sanity, morality, and even mortality itself. The records tell us he was born in an age when the world was still young and malleable, though the exact details of his early life remain shrouded in the very secrecy he would come to embody. What we know for certain is that his pursuit of power led him down the darkest of paths. Paths that culminated in his transformation from living flesh into undead bone. His essence bound to a phylactery that would anchor his consciousness to existence for millennia to come. As an archlich, Vecna became something beyond comprehension. His magical prowess eclipsed that of mortal wizards and rivaled the gods themselves. His ability to manipulate reality, to reshape the very fabric of existence, made him more than a ruler. He became a force of nature, an inevitability. One by one, kingdoms fell before him. The historical records from Oerth, his primary domain of conquest, paint a picture of systematic domination. He didn't rely solely on crude military might, though his armies were vast and terrible. No, Vecna's true weapon was knowledge. He knew the secrets of kings, the hidden weaknesses of nations, the true names of demons and angels alike. To oppose Vecna was to have your deepest shame laid bare, your greatest fear made manifest, your most trusted ally turned against you through the simple application of information you thought safely hidden. In this campaign of dominion, in this slow, methodical consumption of the world, Vecna needed a right hand, not merely a servant, but an extension of his will made flesh. Someone who could translate arcane ambition into tangible conquest. Someone who could wade through blood and ash while Vecna wove his spells in the shadows. He found that someone in Cass the Bloody-Handed. The title itself speaks to his nature and his reputation. According to the chronicles, Cass was already a formidable warrior when he entered Vecna's service, though the exact circumstances of their meeting vary depending on which account you trust. Some records suggest Cass was a rival who, after being defeated by the Lich, accepted vampirism in exchange for fealty as Vecna's chief lieutenant. What remains consistent across all tellings is that Cass became Vecna's most trusted servant, the enforcer of his will across the plains. While Vecna hoarded secrets in his strongholds, Cass led armies across Oerth and beyond. He crushed rebellions before they could form. He destroyed artifacts of good and light. He personally executed rival archmages and clerics who dared to speak against the Whispered One. The name Bloody-Handed wasn't metaphorical. It was earned through centuries of violence in Vecna's name. And yet, what's remarkable about their partnership? What sets it apart from typical master-servant relationships is that they apparently had what some scholars describe as a close and honest relationship, despite both being beings of profound evil. They admired each other's methods. They shared not just a working arrangement, but something that, in beings capable of such darkness, might have resembled respect, or even a twisted form of friendship. Together, they were unstoppable. Vecna provided the strategic brilliance, the magical might, the thousand-year plans. Cass provided the immediate force, the visible terror, the proof that Vecna's will could not be defied. For centuries, they carved what would become known as the Occluded Empire from the bones of the Old World, a vast expanse northwest of the Azure Sea on Oerth. Vecna trusted Cass with administrative tasks, using necromantic magic to grant him unnatural longevity as a vampire. Cities burned, gods retreated. The multiverse itself seemed to bend around their combined will. It was, by all accounts, a perfect partnership. Master and lieutenant, architect and builder, mind and muscle. So perfect, in fact, that when it ended, the only explanation anyone could fathom was jealousy and corruption. Everything changed when Vecna forged a sword for his faithful servant. This was the sword of Cass, a blade that would become as legendary as the betrayal it enabled. The weapon was magnificent by every account, powerful enough to be worthy of Vecna's greatest champion, imbued with abilities that rivaled artifacts of the gods themselves. It could cut through armor and magical wards with equal ease. In Cass's hands, it made him more than just a vampire lord. It made him a force that could challenge beings of immense power, that could stand against armies alone. But the sword came with something unexpected. The blade was sentient, possessed of its own intelligence and will. And according to the official history, Vecna's evil manifested in the sword itself. The weapon began to whisper to its wielder, and those whispers changed everything. The traditional narrative tells us the sword seduced Cass, corrupted him, fed his ego, and stoked his ambition. Day after day, battle after battle, the blade supposedly reminded him that he was the one doing the fighting while Vecna reaped the rewards. That he was the one covered in the blood of enemies while Vecna sat in his tower counting secrets. That he, Cass, was worthy of ruling, not serving. The whispers grew louder, the histories claim. The seed of jealousy, once planted, began to grow. And Cass, mighty Cass, undefeated Cass, Cass the bloody-handed who had never fallen in battle, fell to something far more insidious than any enemy blade he fell. We're told, to his own pride. The moment came at the height of Vecna's power, and this timing is crucial to understanding why the official story raises questions. Vecna stood on the threshold of true godhood through a ritual he had been preparing, a working designed to achieve apotheosis and elevate him from archlich to deity. His empire was complete. His enemies were destroyed or subjugated. The multiverse lay before him like a feast waiting to be devoured. He had won. Completely, utterly, irrevocably. All that remained was to undergo the final ritual, to transform from undead tyrant into something eternal and absolute. It was at this exact moment, as Vecna began the ritual in his rotted tower, that Cass attacked. The histories say he struck without warning, driven by the sword's whispers and his own consuming jealousy, that he couldn't bear to watch his master ascend to godhood, leaving him forever in the shadow. That the thought of bowing to Vecna the god, rather than serving Vecna the lich, was more than his pride could endure. So he raised the blade Vecna himself had forged, and he brought it down upon his master. The battle that followed was cataclysmic. These were two beings of immense power, locked in combat that shook the foundations of reality. The rotted tower trembled. The very planes began to fray at the edges as their conflict escalated. Vecna, caught mid-ritual, but far from helpless, unleashed magical devastation that would have vaporized lesser beings. In the chaos of their battle, Cass landed the blows that would echo through eternity. Using the sword Vecna had crafted for him, Cass managed to cut off Vecna's left hand, the same hand that had traced countless runes of power, that had literally reshaped reality. But Cass wasn't finished. He drove the blade forward, and the sword plunged into Vecna's left eye, destroying or displacing the very organ that Vecna had relied upon for so much of his power. The result was catastrophic. The ritual Vecna had been performing, the delicate magical working that was supposed to elevate him to godhood, shattered. a massive explosion destroyed the rotted tower entirely. The energies unleashed, carving a scar across the plane itself. The blast threw both combatants, master and betrayer, across the multiverse. According to some accounts, Vecna gained the upper hand just as the explosion occurred, but was unable to complete Cass's destruction before the tower's annihilation separated them. Other tellings suggest different sequences, but all agree on the outcome. Both survived, but both were cast into different imprisonments, transformed by what they'd done to each other. Vecna's failed attempt to ascend led to him being banished to Cavicius, which was drawn into the domains of dread by the dark powers. His hand and eye, severed by Cass, became artifacts of terrible power that would plague the multiverse for ages to come. Cass, in turn, became the Dark Lord of Taveg, a realm from Oerth that was also drawn into the domains of dread, bordering Cavicius itself. The two realms formed what became known as the Burning Peaks, ensuring that even in their imprisonment, Vecna and Cass would remain locked in proximity, in eternal conflict. And thus history recorded it: Cass the betrayer, Cass the traitor, Cass who let jealousy override loyalty, who let the sword's corruption override wisdom, who destroyed the greatest empire the multiverse had ever known because he couldn't accept his place in it. The chronicles are unanimous in their condemnation. Sages write of Cass as a cautionary tale, a warning about the dangers of pride and the corrupting influence of sentient weapons. Bards sing songs about the faithful servant who couldn't remain faithful, who threw away everything for a moment of glory that earned him nothing but eternal damnation. Priests use his story to illustrate the importance of knowing one's place, of recognizing how even the most trusted can be turned by whispers of power. No one mourns Cass. No one celebrates him. He's remembered only as the greatest traitor in the history of the plains, the lieutenant who stabbed his master in the back at the moment of ultimate triumph. The very name Cass has become synonymous with betrayal across multiple worlds. And Cass himself, the legends say he remains trapped in his domain within the Dread Realms, cursed to spend eternity waging an endless war against Vecna's forces. A conflict that can never truly be won or lost, only perpetuated. A fitting punishment, the scholars agree, for one who betrayed the master who had given him everything. This is the official history. This is what everyone knows. This is what you've been taught to believe. But what if it's all a lie? What if the real story, the true story, is so much darker and so much nobler than anyone ever imagined? What if Cass didn't destroy Vecna out of jealousy, but out of desperate necessity? What if the greatest villain in history was actually its greatest hero? And the only way to save the multiverse was to accept eternal villainy. To understand that possibility, we need to look deeper. We need to examine what Vecna was truly attempting in that tower, what the ritual really meant, and what the Sword of Cass might actually have been showing its wielder. We need to ask the question no one else has dared to ask. What if Cass was right? Section 2. The Whispered Ritual, the Singularity of Secrets. Let's begin with a simple question, one that should have been asked centuries ago, but somehow never was. Why would Cass betray Vecna at that exact moment? Think about it carefully. Really consider the timing. Cass had served the Whispered One for hundreds of years. Centuries of unwavering loyalty, of executing every command without question, of conquering in his master's name. If he was truly consumed by jealousy and ambition, if he truly couldn't stand being second, why wait until the very moment of Vecna's ultimate triumph to strike? The traditional explanation falls apart under even casual scrutiny. If Cass wanted power for himself, attacking Vecna at his strongest made no tactical sense whatsoever. A cunning warrior, which Cass undoubtedly was, would have waited for vulnerability. He would have struck during a moment of weakness, perhaps when Vecna was recovering from a magical working, or distracted by enemies, or depleted from battle. Instead, according to the official history, Cass chose to attack when Vecna was literally in the midst of performing a ritual to ascend to godhood. When the Lich was channeling immense power, surrounded by the full might of his defenses, in the heart of his own fortress. It makes no sense. Unless, of course, timing wasn't a choice. Unless the moment of the ritual wasn't just convenient. It was the only moment that mattered. Unless Cass wasn't seizing an opportunity for himself, but rather preventing something far worse than any empire, worse than any tyranny. To understand what Cass might have truly been stopping, we need to look past the simple narrative of ascension and examine what we know about Vecna's ritual and what it was actually designed to accomplish. Vecna has always been obsessed with secrets. It's not just a characteristic, it's the core of his entire being. Every spell he ever crafted, every artifact he ever created, every nation he ever conquered was ultimately about acquiring knowledge that no one else possessed. The eye of Vecna doesn't just see, it perceives hidden truths, invisible connections, the secret patterns underlying reality itself. The hand of Vecna doesn't just grasp, it manipulates fundamental forces. For Vecna, power and knowledge were never separate pursuits. They were the same thing. To know everything was to control everything. And we know from the records that have survived that Vecna's ambitions extended beyond simple godhood. In more recent times, the Lich God has been documented attempting what's known as the ritual of remaking, a working designed to reshape the multiverse itself. The ritual involves gathering powerful secrets, extracting energy from them, and using that energy, combined with Vecna's godlike magic, to fundamentally alter existence. This wasn't conquest in any traditional sense. This was reality manipulation on a cosmic scale, an attempt to literally remake the multiverse according to Vecna's design. Now, the ritual chaos interrupted happened long before Vecna's more recent attempts. Back when the Lich was still seeking his initial apotheosis rather than wielding divine power. But here's what we need to consider. If Vecna in his later, more powerful form as a god attempted to remake the multiverse, what might he have been planning in that original ritual when he first sought divinity? Simple ascension to godhood, perhaps. But Vecna has never done anything simply, and his pattern across the ages has consistently shown an ambition that goes beyond what others might consider sufficient. One interpretation of what the ritual might have entailed, based on what we know of Vecna's later actions and his fundamental nature, is that even then he sought something more than just divine status. The phrase remaking the multiverse in his image could suggest many things, but when applied to a being whose entire existence revolves around the acquisition and control of secrets, it raises uncomfortable questions. What if the barriers between planes weren't just to be influenced, but dissolved? What if individual consciousnesses weren't just to be dominated, but absorbed into a singular awareness? What if his image meant not a universe that looked like Vecna wanted, but a universe that was Vecna? This is speculation, of course, but it's speculation grounded in the pattern of behavior we've observed. Vecna doesn't settle. He doesn't accept limitations. He doesn't think small. And for a being whose power comes from knowing what others don't, the ultimate frustration would be the existence of knowledge he cannot access, knowledge locked in other minds, in other planes, in corners of existence separated from his awareness. As long as the multiverse exists in its current form, with its separated planes and individual consciousnesses, there will always be secrets beyond Vecna's reach. Always something he doesn't know. Always some knowledge he cannot claim. For most beings, even incredibly powerful ones, this would be an acceptable limitation. But considering what we know of Vecna, a being who betrayed his own mother for power, who transformed himself into an abomination to escape death, who spent millennia pursuing singular goals, accepting that some secrets would forever remain beyond him, seems inconsistent with everything else about his character. This leads us to wonder, what would Vecna consider the perfect universe? And the uncomfortable answer, based on his nature, might be one where the very concept of separate becomes meaningless. Picture what this could mean if such an interpretation holds any weight. Not just conquest, where things survive to be ruled. Not just domination, where beings remain distinct enough to be controlled. but something more fundamental, a dissolution of the barriers that make existence multiple rather than singular. The material plane, the Feywild, the Shadowfell, the elemental planes, the outer planes, all of them potentially bleeding into each other, their distinct natures merging. Mount Celestia and the 9 hells becoming indistinguishable. The abyss and Elysium, chaos and law, good and evil, all of these carefully maintained oppositions that give the multiverse its structure collapsing into something else entirely. And the people, consider what this might mean for consciousness itself. Every soul that ever existed, every being that ever sparked with independent thought, potentially reduced to information, to knowledge, to data that could be accessed and understood without the barrier of separate identity. Your memories becoming part of a greater whole. Your experiences becoming accessible to an overarching awareness. Not killed exactly, but integrated, absorbed, made part of something that, while technically containing everything you ever were, would have none of your actual individuality remaining. This is where we move into the realm of interpretation rather than documented fact. But it's an interpretation that helps make sense of what otherwise seems senseless. Why would Cass attack at the precise moment of the ritual? Because if the ritual's true purpose went beyond simple apotheosis, if it involved fundamental changes to the nature of existence itself, then timing would be everything. The ritual would need to reach a critical threshold before it could be disrupted. Strike too early, and Vecna simply starts over. Wait too long, and the changes become irreversible. Think about what this means for Cass's supposed betrayal. The jealousy explanation requires us to believe that Cass, after centuries of loyalty, just happened to lose control of his ambition at the precise instant when stopping the ritual would matter most. That the sword's corruption, which had supposedly been working on him for years, just happened to push him over the edge at the exact moment when something cosmic hung in the balance. The coincidence strains credibility, unless it wasn't a coincidence at all. Consider another possibility. What if the sword of Cass wasn't corrupting its wielder in the way the traditional narrative suggests? What if those whispers that everyone assumes were feeding his ego and ambition were actually doing something different, warning him, showing him what the ritual would actually accomplish? Because here's something the traditional narrative glosses over. Cass and Vecna had what some accounts describe as a remarkably close relationship for beings of such immense power and dark nature. The historical records, the ones that bother to look beyond the simple betrayal narrative, describe a partnership built on more than just master and servant dynamics. They fought together. They planned together. They shared victories, and on rare occasions, even setbacks. Vecna trusted Cass with the execution of his most important plans. Cass received not just orders from Vecna, but strategic insights, explanations of long-term thinking. There was a bond there, dark and terrible perhaps, but substantive, which makes the jealousy explanation even more questionable. After centuries of this partnership, after hundreds of years of being trusted with critical aspects of Vecna's plans, are we really to believe that Cass suddenly couldn't handle his position, that he abruptly decided ruling was better than serving, despite having accepted his role for longer than most empires endure? Or is it more plausible that something changed, that Cass learned something that altered his entire understanding of what he was serving? The ritual of remaking would have been Vecna's most closely guarded secret. He wouldn't have shared the full details with anyone, not even Cass. Why would he? From Vecna's perspective, there was no need. Cass was a warrior, an enforcer. He didn't need to understand the intricacies of the magical working. He just needed to keep potential threats away while Vecna completed it. But what if Cass found out anyway? What if somehow, despite all of Vecna's precautions, his lieutenant discovered the true scope of the ritual? Imagine being in Cass's position. You've served faithfully for centuries. You've built an empire for your master. You've crushed his enemies and expanded his domain across planes. You believe you're working towards something terrible, yes, but comprehensible, a dictatorship, an iron-fisted rule, a dark age of tyranny. These are concepts you can understand, even embrace as a being of evil yourself. But then you learn the truth, or what you believe to be the truth. You discover that the ritual might not create an empire to rule, but might fundamentally change the nature of existence itself. That there might not be conquests to celebrate or enemies to defeat in any meaningful way, because the very structure of reality could be transformed. You, Cass the Bloody-Handed, who have existed for centuries as your own being, with your own thoughts and will, might face the possibility of ceasing to exist as anything independent. Not through destruction in any conventional sense, but through transformation into something else entirely. And you realize that you might be the only one who knows. That there are no heroes preparing to stop this because they don't know it's happening. That the cosmic powers that might intervene are unaware of the threat until it's too late. You, wielder of a strange, whispering blade, could be the only being in position to prevent whatever the ritual would accomplish. Can you feel the weight of that burden? The crushing responsibility of being the only person who might be able to stop something you don't even fully understand, but recognize as fundamentally wrong. You didn't ask for this knowledge. You didn't want to be put in this position. You've spent centuries building something, being loyal to someone, serving a cause. And now you've discovered that everything you've worked for leads to an outcome you cannot accept, based on what you believe the ritual will accomplish. This interpretation that Cass acted not from corruption, but from awareness, not from jealousy, but from desperate necessity, transforms the entire narrative. It suggests that the sword didn't make Cass ambitious. It made him informed. And that information came with an impossible choice between loyalty to his master and loyalty to existence as he understood it. Section 3. The Sentinel Blade, a cosmic antibody. The Sword of Cass. Let's talk about this weapon, because understanding what it truly is might be the key to understanding everything. The canonical descriptions are consistent. The sword is sentient, chaotic evil in alignment, possessing an intelligence of 15, a wisdom of 13, and a charisma of 16. It communicates telepathically with its wielder, speaking in whispers that only the bearer can hear. And according to every official source, its driving purpose is singular: the destruction of Vecna, his followers, his works, and anyone corrupted by his artifacts. What's fascinating is that this purpose is acknowledged even by divine beings. The goddess Ion herself described the sword in terms that seem contradictory on the surface. A powerful evil drives the sword, but to a just end. Think about that phrasing. Not evil pretending to be good, but evil genuinely pursuing a just outcome. The sword's nature is chaotic evil. That's not metaphor or interpretation. It's documented fact. Yet its obsession with destroying Vecna and everything connected to him serves what even a goddess of knowledge recognizes as a just purpose. The sword whispers, "That much is canon." And what does it whisper about? According to the records, it encourages betrayal, particularly if such acts would increase the wielder's standing. It urged Cass to supplant Vecna, to rule the Lich's empire in Vecna's stead. The traditional interpretation takes these facts and concludes that the sword corrupted Cass through ego and ambition, that it fed his pride until he couldn't resist striking at his master. And perhaps that interpretation is entirely correct. Perhaps the sword simply is what it appears to be, a malevolent weapon that turned servant against master through the oldest trick in the book. But here's where things get interesting. If the sword's sole purpose is Vecna's destruction, and every source agrees on this point, then we need to ask a question that scholars rarely consider. Why would Vecna create such a thing? The official histories tell us he forged the blade himself, imbuing it with power worthy of his greatest champion. Some accounts even suggest he placed a portion of Cass's own consciousness into the weapon. But why would the most calculating being in existence, a master of secrets who planned centuries in advance, create a sentient weapon whose entire purpose would become his own destruction? The typical explanation is that Vecna made a mistake, that even he, with all his knowledge and foresight, somehow failed to anticipate what the sword would become, that he accidentally created the instrument of his own downfall through simple oversight. But consider what we know of Vecna's character. This is a being who accounted for every variable, who knew secrets that gods tried to keep hidden, who spent thousands of years pursuing his goals with meticulous precision. The idea that he simply miscalculated, that he was catastrophically wrong about the nature of a weapon he personally created, requires us to believe the impossible, that the master of secrets didn't know his own creation's true nature. This leads to two possibilities. Either Vecna did make an unprecedented error in judgment, or something about the sword's sentience didn't originate with him. Perhaps he forged the physical blade, imbued it with power, even intended it to be sentient in service to Cass. But what if something else, some force or intelligence beyond Vecna's control, took residence in the weapon he created? What if the consciousness that drives the sword, that obsesses over Vecna's destruction, wasn't entirely Vecna's creation? This is speculation, but it's speculation that arises from trying to reconcile what we know. The sword exists. It's chaotic evil. It whispers betrayal. All of these are facts, but it also serves what a goddess calls a just end, despite its evil nature. It succeeded in stopping Vecna at the exact moment when stopping him mattered most. And it continues to this day to seek Vecna's destruction with an obsession that goes beyond simple malevolence. It's described as a fixation that eventually transfers to its wielder. One way to interpret these facts is to consider the sword as something like a cosmic immune response, though that's admittedly applying metaphor to something we may never fully understand. When a body faces a deadly pathogen, it doesn't create antibodies that are good in any moral sense. They're simply tools designed for a specific purpose, using whatever methods work to eliminate the threat. The sword of Cass operates the same way. It's not good. It's evil, demonstrably so. But its evil is directed toward a specific target. And in being directed toward Vecna, it paradoxically serves existence itself. Think about what the sword actually whispers, based on what we know. Yes, it encourages betrayal. Yes, it urged Cass to supplant his master. But these whispers, these corruptions, all pointed Cass toward the same outcome, attacking Vecna. If the sword's purpose was simply to make Cass ambitious and powerful, it would have countless opportunities to do so in ways that didn't involve confronting the most dangerous being in existence. But instead, all of its influence, all of its corruption, all of its whispers led inexorably toward one specific act, striking at Vecna during the ritual. This suggests that the sword's corruption of Cass wasn't random malevolence or simple ego-feeding. It was targeted, purposeful, designed to ensure that when the critical moment came, Cass would be willing and able to act. The jealousy, the ambition, the resentment, whether these were genuine feelings the sword amplified or entirely artificial emotions it created, all served to override the one thing that might have stopped Cass from attacking: his loyalty to Vecna. And here's something else to consider. The sword's obsession extends beyond just Vecna himself. It seeks to destroy anyone corrupted by the eye and hand of Vecna. It compels its wielders to hunt down Vecna's artifacts, his followers, his works. This isn't the behavior of a weapon that simply wants power or chaos. This is the behavior of something dedicated to a specific mission: the complete eradication of Vecna's influence on the multiverse. That kind of single-minded purpose suggests design, suggests intention beyond mere evil for evil's sake. So what might the sword have shown Cass, or made him feel, or convinced him to believe? We know it whispers. We know it can dominate weak-willed wielders, forcing them to act according to its desires. We know it communicates telepathically, that it has intelligence sufficient to understand complex situations. Given these capabilities, it's plausible that the sword didn't just whisper vague encouragements of ambition. It could have communicated more specific information, perhaps impressions of what Vecna's ritual would accomplish, perhaps warnings about the true scope of the Lich's plans, perhaps arguments for why attacking at that specific moment was necessary. Whether the sword showed Cass visions of a universe unmade, or simply convinced him through more mundane manipulation that the ritual needed to be stopped, we can't know with certainty. What we do know is that Cass, who had served faithfully for centuries, attacked at the precise moment when Vecna was most vulnerable, despite also being most powerful, vulnerable, because he was committed to the ritual, unable to defend himself fully without disrupting the working. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence, which suggests either impossibly lucky corruption by the sword or purposeful manipulation toward a specific goal. The sword didn't force Cass to act, though. That's crucial to understand. It can dominate weak-willed individuals who fail to resist it. But Cass was no weakling. A vampire lord who had conquered nations, who had served as Vecna's right hand for centuries, wouldn't have been easily controlled against his will. The sword could whisper, could encourage, could present arguments and information. But the choice of what to do with that information remained with Cass. He had to decide, of his own volition, whether to raise the blade against his master. This means that whatever the sword showed or told him, whatever corruption or truth it whispered into his mind, Cass ultimately chose to believe it, chose to act on it, chose to commit what history would call the ultimate betrayal. And that choice, that moment of decision, transforms him from a puppet of the sword's corruption into someone who made a conscious decision. For whatever reasons he believed were valid. The sword of Cass still exists today, still seeks Vecna's destruction with the same obsessive intensity it has always possessed. It still whispers to those who wield it. It still encourages betrayal and violence. It's still chaotic evil in every measurable way. But its evil serves a purpose that even gods acknowledge as just. And perhaps that's the most unsettling truth of all. That sometimes the only thing capable of stopping ultimate evil is something that's willing to be evil itself, as long as that evil points in the right direction. Whether you interpret the sword as Vecna's failed creation, as a cosmic defense mechanism that took residence in a weapon he forged, or simply as a malevolent artifact that happened to serve a greater purpose through pure coincidence, the result is the same. The Sword of Cass exists as the multiverse's insurance policy against Vecna, a weapon specifically designed, whether by intention or by cosmic accident, to ensure that someone, somewhere, will always be willing to oppose the Whispered One, regardless of the cost. And Cass paid that cost, whether manipulated by evil or guided toward necessity, whether corrupted by whispers of ambition or warned of genuine danger. He raised that blade and struck. The sword gave him the means and possibly the motivation. But he made the choice. And in making it, he transformed from Vecna's trusted lieutenant into the most hated traitor in the multiverse's history, and possibly, simultaneously, into its unknowing savior. Section 4. The Tower of Rot, the Ultimate Sacrifice. The Rotted Tower. The name itself evokes decay, something that should have fallen long ago, but persists through unnatural will. This was Vecna's seat of power, the place where he conducted his most important rituals and maintained the center of his vast empire. The exact nature and location of this tower has been debated by scholars. Some accounts suggest it was an obsidian tower. Others place it elsewhere, and the historical records don't provide complete clarity on its precise architectural details. What we do know with certainty is that it was here, in this tower, that the confrontation between Vecna and Cass would reach its cataclysmic conclusion. Cass knew the tower well. He had served Vecna for centuries, had walked its halls countless times, had stood in his master's presence during important discussions of strategy and conquest. For Cass, approaching the tower on that fateful day wouldn't have been entering enemy territory. It would have been coming home. Except this time, everything was different. This time, he came with the sword at his side, heavy not with physical weight, but with purpose, with the whispers that had changed everything, with the burden of what he now believed he had to do. The ritual was already underway when Cass arrived. Vecna had accumulated enough power and magic to achieve apotheosis. to transform from archlich into deity. And he was in the midst of performing the working that would accomplish this transformation. The Lich stood in his ritual space, channeling forces that few mortals could even perceive, let alone manipulate. This was the culmination of centuries of planning, the moment when Vecna would transcend his already formidable state and become something even greater. And Cass interrupted it. Did Cass hesitate at the threshold? Did he pause before committing to the action that would forever brand him as the ultimate traitor? The histories don't record such moments of doubt. They paint the scene in broad strokes. The loyal servant turned betrayer, the sword's corruption finally bearing fruit, the inevitable consequence of giving too much power to someone who wanted more. But if we consider the possibility that Cass acted not from simple jealousy, but from desperate belief that the ritual needed to be stopped, then that moment of decision must have carried unbearable weight. This was the being he'd served for hundreds of years, the master he'd fought for, conquered nations for, built an empire for. Whatever darkness existed in Vecna, and there was darkness beyond measure, Cass had accepted it, had made peace with it, had become part of it. They had shared what some accounts describe as a close and honest relationship, admiring each other's methods despite both being creatures of profound evil. And now Cass was about to destroy it all, based on what he believed about the ritual's true purpose, based on what the sword had shown or told him, based on a conviction that stopping Vecna at this moment mattered more than centuries of loyalty. The attack, when it came, marked the beginning of what the chronicles describe as a tremendous battle. These were two beings of immense power, and their conflict shook the very foundations of the tower and the lands around it. Vecna, caught mid-ritual, had to defend himself while his magical working unraveled around him. Cass, empowered by the sword that had been forged specifically for him, struck with the precision of a warrior who had fought for centuries and knew exactly how dangerous his opponent was. The traditional narrative portrays this as chaos, as Cass driven mad with ambition attacking in a frenzy of jealous rage. But we might consider another interpretation based on what we know happened. If Cass's goal was truly to disrupt the ritual rather than to claim power for himself, then his strikes would have been calculated, targeted, designed not necessarily to kill Vecna, which would have been effectively impossible anyway, given the Lich's phylactery, but to stop the ritual from completing. The timing supports this interpretation. He didn't attack before the ritual began, when Vecna might have simply postponed and tried again later. He attacked during the ritual, when Vecna was committed, when the working was vulnerable to disruption, when stopping it would matter. According to the accounts, Vecna gained the upper hand during their battle, despite being interrupted mid-ritual, despite facing his most powerful lieutenant empowered by an artifact-level weapon. The Archlich's mastery of magic proved superior. The battle turned in his favor. The moment came when Vecna, having overcome Cass's assault, moved to slay his former servant. It should have ended there, with the betrayer destroyed and the ritual presumably able to be restarted later. But it didn't end there, because in that critical instant, as Vecna moved to deliver the killing blow, Cass made his strike. The sword of Cass swept through Vecna's defenses and cut off his left hand. Not a wild swing born of desperation, but a precise cut that severed the hand completely. The same hand that had traced countless ritual gestures, that had written the book of vile darkness, that had reshaped reality itself. It fell, separated from the Lich's body. But Cass wasn't finished. Perhaps knowing he wouldn't get another chance. Perhaps acting on pure instinct, perhaps guided by the sword's purpose, he drove the blade forward. The tip plunged into Vecna's left eye, not merely damaging it, but destroying or displacing it entirely. The eye that had seen across planes, that had perceived hidden truths, that had been one of Vecna's greatest tools for understanding and manipulating reality. The result was catastrophic, with the ritual already disrupted by the battle, with Vecna's hand and eye suddenly severed. The magical energies that had been carefully controlled throughout the working were released all at once. A massive explosion destroyed the rotted tower completely. The accounts describe it being reduced to a heap of ash, the entire structure consumed in the cataclysmic release of power. The lands around the tower were shaken by the blast. The explosion claimed not only the tower, but apparently both combatants as well. Both Cass and Vecna were seemingly destroyed in that moment, though death for beings like them is rarely simple or final. Only Vecna's left hand and eye survived the battle, perhaps because they had already been severed before the explosion, perhaps because of their intrinsic magical nature, perhaps because of events that had happened to them before. The sword of Cass also survived, its purpose unfulfilled, its obsession with Vecna's destruction continuing even after the battle. What came after is a matter of somewhat conflicting accounts, though all agree on the essential outcome. Vecna's attempt to achieve apotheosis had failed, interrupted at the critical moment. Some tellings suggest he was banished to the realm of Cavicius, but not before Cass was destroyed. After this failed ascension, Vecna was drawn into the domains of dread by the dark powers, imprisoned in Cavicius. Cass, who had apparently died in the explosion, found himself transformed by long exposure to Cavicius's negative energy into a vampire, or perhaps more accurately, into a different form of vampirism than he had possessed before. He became the Dark Lord of Tavag, a domain that bordered Cavicius, the two realms forming what became known as the Burning Peaks. The proximity wasn't accidental. The dark powers, those mysterious entities that govern the domains of dread, placed former master and former servant in adjacent realms, ensuring that even in their imprisonment, they would remain locked in conflict. For a time, the two domains fought what some describe as an endless war, with Vecna and Cass continuing their mutual hatred through proxies and direct confrontation. In those final instants before the explosion separated them, what passed between them? Did Vecna understand in that moment why Cass had truly attacked? Or did he die, or rather, enter his scattered existence, still believing the official story of jealousy and betrayal? Did Cass feel triumph at having stopped the ritual, or only grief at having destroyed the master he'd served for centuries? Did they recognize in each other's eyes what this moment truly meant? Or were they blind to everything except the immediate catastrophe of the tower's destruction? We'll never know with certainty. What we do know is that Cass made a choice in that tower. Whether driven by the sword's corruption or by genuine belief that the ritual needed to be stopped, whether motivated by ambition or by necessity, he raised his blade against the being he had served longer than most mortals live. He struck at the exact moment when it would cause maximum disruption to the ritual. He severed the hand and eye with precision that suggests purpose rather than random violence. And the result was the destruction of everything: the tower, the ritual, the empire, the partnership that had lasted centuries, and apparently both combatants themselves. If Cass acted from jealousy, as the official history claims, then he achieved nothing. He didn't seize Vecna's power. He didn't claim the empire. He gained no glory, no throne, no reward for his betrayal. Instead, he was apparently destroyed, and then imprisoned in the domains of dread, cursed to wage an eternal war he could never win. But if Cass acted to stop the ritual, if he believed that preventing Vecna's apotheosis, or whatever the ritual would truly accomplish, mattered more than loyalty or personal survival, then he succeeded completely. The ritual was disrupted at its most critical moment. Vecna's transformation was prevented. The Lich's hand and eye were severed, becoming separate artifacts rather than remaining part of his power. And Cass himself, though apparently killed, persisted in a form that would allow him to continue opposing Vecna for centuries to come. The price for this success, if success it was, couldn't have been higher. His name became synonymous with betrayal. His memory was cursed across the plains. Everything he'd built was destroyed, and he was condemned to eternal imprisonment in a realm designed to torment Dark Lords with their own crimes. If Cass truly did sacrifice everything to stop the ritual, then his reward was to have history remember him as nothing more than a jealous traitor who couldn't accept his place, to be hated forever by the very existence he might have preserved. Section 5. The Prisoner and the Jailer, an Eternal Vigil. The explosion should have been the end. In any reasonable universe, the forces unleashed in the rotted tower would have obliterated both Vecna and Cass completely, scattering their essences beyond any hope of recovery. But the multiverse has never been particularly interested in simple endings, and beings of such immense power don't get the luxury of clean conclusions. Instead, they got something far stranger and far more terrible. They got the attention of the dark powers. After Vecna's failed attempt to ascend to full deity status, something unprecedented happened. The Lich was banished to his citadel of Cavicius, a fortress he had long maintained on the quasi-elemental plane of ash near the border to the negative energy plane. But Cavicius didn't remain in its original location. The dark powers, those mysterious entities that govern the domains of dread, reached out and drew the entire citadel into their realm, imprisoning Vecna in what would become his own domain. Cass's fate was equally strange, but different. According to the records, his long exposure to Cavicius's negative energy had transformed him into a vampire, or perhaps more accurately, it had changed the nature of his vampirism into something new. When Vecna's imprisonment freed Cass from his own apparent destruction, the vampire found himself facing a shapeless wall of mist. When it cleared, he had become the master, or more precisely the Dark Lord, of Taveg, a realm originally from Oerth that had also been drawn into the domains of dread. And here's what's remarkable about the Dark Power's choice. Taveg bordered Cavicius directly. The two domains formed what became known as the Burning Peaks Cluster, a connected realm where former master and former servant would remain in proximity despite their imprisonment. The dark powers, in their inscrutable wisdom, had placed Vecna and Cass adjacent to each other, ensuring that even in their punishment, they would be locked in eternal awareness of one another. The traditional interpretation of this arrangement is straightforward. Its cosmic irony, poetic justice. The betrayer and the betrayed, forced to exist side by side for all eternity, unable to fully destroy each other, but also unable to escape. Cass waged what the accounts describe as an endless war of attrition with Vecna's forces, constantly fighting, but never achieving victory. He sought desperately to retrieve the Sword of Cass from Vecna's citadel, where he erroneously believed it was being kept. It seemed like punishment perfectly designed for both of them. Vecna trapped despite his power. Cass doomed to fight a war he could never win. But what if we consider this arrangement from a different angle? What if Cass's imprisonment wasn't purely punitive, but also functional? Think about what a Dark Lord actually is in the domains of dread, a being whose evil has drawn the attention of the dark powers. Yes, but also someone bound to their domain given power within it, made into something more than they were. Cass didn't just become a prisoner. He became the lord of his realm, a vampire with dominion over Tavag, capable of raising armies and waging the very war the histories describe. And who was his war against? Vecna. Always Vecna, the Dark Lord of the adjacent domain, the being whose ritual Cass had interrupted, whose hand and eye he had severed. Cass gathered an army of undead to oppose Vecna's forces. He constantly fought against the influence of the being he had once served. The eternal conflict between Tavag and Cavicius wasn't random chaos. It was focused, purposeful, directed entirely at keeping Vecna engaged in defensive operations, rather than whatever schemes the Lich-turned demigod might otherwise pursue. We could interpret this as simple hatred, the natural consequence of their mutual betrayal. Cass hates Vecna for whatever happened between them. Vecna hates Cass for the attack in the tower, and so they fight forever, because that's what enemies do. But there's another way to view it, one that arises from considering the timing and the specifics. Cass's war wasn't about conquest. He couldn't conquer Cavicius. The domains don't work that way. It wasn't about revenge in any satisfying sense. Neither could truly destroy the other. But it did accomplish something very specific. It kept Vecna's attention divided, kept the Lich God focused on the threat from Tavag rather than on other pursuits. If Vecna retained knowledge of the ritual that Cass had interrupted, if he still possessed the understanding of how to attempt what he'd been trying to accomplish in the rotted tower, then keeping him distracted, keeping him engaged in an eternal conflict, might serve a purpose beyond simple vengeance. As long as Vecna had to worry about Cass's armies at his borders, as long as he had to defend against constant incursions from Tavag, he wasn't free to turn his full attention to starting the ritual anew. This interpretation, that Cass's role shifted from lieutenant to something like a warden, is speculative, but it fits the observed facts. Cass didn't try to escape the domains of dread. He didn't seek some other domain to conquer or some other purpose to pursue. He focused entirely on opposing Vecna, on maintaining pressure against Cavicius, on being a constant thorn in the side of the being he'd once served. That single-minded dedication mirrors the sword of Cass itself, which continues to seek Vecna's destruction above all other goals. And the brilliance of this arrangement, if it was indeed strategic rather than merely vindictive, is that it's self-sustaining. Cass doesn't have to convince anyone of his real motivations. As long as history remembers him as the jealous traitor, as long as the official story remains unchallenged, then Vecna himself accepts that explanation. The Lich God, who prides himself on knowing everything, on uncovering every hidden truth, believes the obvious narrative about Cass's betrayal and doesn't look deeper. Why would he, ambitious lieutenant, corrupting weapon, inevitable betrayal? It's almost predictable in its structure. And by accepting that story, Vecna might blind himself to the possibility that Cass's actions were actually strategic, were actually successful at preventing something specific. The eternal war in the Burning Peaks continued for centuries, with neither side achieving decisive victory. Cass sought the sword, believing Vecna held it, though this belief was mistaken. Vecna defended his citadel while also pursuing his own schemes, eventually managing to lure the demigod Eos into Cavicius and absorbing his divine energy, growing stronger even in imprisonment. The stalemate persisted, master and servant locked in perpetual conflict, until something changed. Vecna eventually escaped the domains of dread. The accounts describe him breaking free during events sometimes called Die Vecna Die, an attempt to overthrow Oerth's gods. When Vecna was defeated during this bid for control, something interesting happened to the domains. After Vecna escaped Ravenloft, both his domain and Taveg were destroyed. The Burning Peaks cluster apparently ceased to exist in its previous form, the two realms no longer serving whatever purpose they had fulfilled, while both Dark Lords were imprisoned there. What happened to Cass after Taveg's destruction is less clearly documented in the records readily available, though some accounts suggest he can pass through the mists in ways other Dark Lords cannot. The Sword of Cass continues to exist, continues to seek Vecna's destruction with the same obsession it has always possessed. And Vecna himself, having escaped the domains of dread and survived his bid for greater power, eventually achieved full godhood, becoming the god of secrets and undeath that he remains today. Which brings us to the present, or at least to the most recent accounts. Vecna exists as a deity, possessing knowledge and power beyond what he held even as an archlich. He wanders the entire multiverse rather than claiming a single domain. He has achieved, in many ways, everything he sought when he began that ritual in the rotted tower so long ago. He has godhood. He has power. He has influence across the planes. And yet, perhaps, the one thing he didn't achieve was the specific transformation that ritual would have accomplished, whatever its true purpose might have been. Does Cass regret his choice? We cannot know. The accounts don't give us access to his inner thoughts, don't tell us whether he lies awake, if vampires can be said to truly sleep, and wonders what might have been if he'd chosen differently. What we do know is that for centuries, Cass existed as the villain that history needed him to be. He played the role of betrayer, of traitor, of the ambitious lieutenant who turned on his master. And in playing that role, whether by design or by accident, whether through the sword's corruption or through genuine conviction, he became something that opposed Vecna when few others could. the greatest heroes of the multiverse get songs sung about them. They get statues erected in their honor, temples built to commemorate their deeds. Their names become synonymous with courage and virtue, spoken with reverence by those who came after. But Cass will never have any of that. His name remains a curse. His memory is a warning. His legacy is one of treachery and betrayal. The chronicles record him only as the lieutenant who stabbed his master in the back at the moment of triumph, who threw away centuries of loyalty for a grab at power that gained him nothing but eternal imprisonment. And if our interpretation holds any weight, if Cass truly did act to stop the ritual rather than to seize power for himself, if he made a conscious choice to prevent what he believed the ritual would accomplish, then that's exactly how it has to be. The moment people understand what he really did, the moment the truth becomes widely known, Vecna would know too. And whatever strategic advantage exists in keeping the god of secrets focused on a false narrative would be lost. So perhaps Cass endures, whether still existing in some form after Tavag's destruction, whether scattered across the plains, whether waiting for another opportunity to oppose Vecna when needed. The sword of Cass continues its hunt, continues its obsession with Vecna's destruction. The weapon still whispers to those who wield it, still encourages betrayal and violence, still pursues its singular purpose with the same intensity it has always possessed. And somewhere in the multiverse, the vampire who was once Vecna's most trusted servant either continues his vigil or has passed into whatever ending beings like him eventually find. The story suggests that sometimes the only thing capable of stopping ultimate evil is someone willing to become a monster themselves, as long as that monstrosity serves a greater purpose. That the greatest sacrifice isn't always dying for a cause. Sometimes it's living with the consequences of saving everyone while being reviled for it. That the line between villain and hero might sometimes be so thin that the only difference is perspective, and the only witnesses capable of seeing both sides carry burdens too heavy to share. The next time you hear the name Cass the Bloody-Handed spoken with contempt, the next time you read of his betrayal in the chronicles, the next time bards sing of his treachery, remember this interpretation. Remember that the greatest villain in the multiverse's history might actually have been something more complicated than history records. And remember that somewhere, in whatever form he now takes, a vampire who struck down his master continues to bear the burden of a choice made centuries ago. A choice that history condemns, but that might have saved existence itself. If you found this exploration of Vecna and Cass, of betrayal and sacrifice, of the hidden truths beneath the surface of legend compelling, if you want to journey deeper into the shadows of forgotten lore and question the stories we've all been told, then please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. there are so many more secrets waiting to be uncovered, so many more legends that deserve a second look, so many more stories where the villain might not be quite what they seem. Join us as we continue to peel back the layers of history and discover what truth might be hiding beneath centuries of accepted narrative. Until next time, keep questioning, keep wondering, and remember that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones history remembers as monsters.